often get asked by executives, what does it take to win? And they're referring, of course, to the awards that we're celebrating tonight, the Customer Satisfaction Index Awards, that tonight we are celebrating the 8th year in Kuwait and the 2nd in the UAE. And my answer is always the same. Make sure that you focus on one thing, and that thing is customer service and customer excellence. And it sounds easier than it really is. The reality is that executives do understand that they need to do three things. The first thing that they need to do is know what customers expect of them, right? So as all of us as executives, we need to know what customers want from us. The second thing we need to do as executives is match these expectations, satisfy them in a way that pleases our customers. And then the third thing that we need to do is whenever we can, and that's not always possible, but whenever we can, we need to exceed these expectations. Now, the reality is that while companies, understand this, they're not always able to achieve this. And the reason that this is happening is, if you think about it, the pace of change, the world that we live in today, is much more different than the world that we lived in before. We have a challenge where all of us as executives are living in a very fluid market. And what we see today is that only 10% of companies in our index, and this is actual numbers, so 10% of companies in our index are achieving scores above 80 points. Now, in our mind, 80 is a threshold where we say the score is strong. So only 10% of the companies, over 600 companies that we're speaking about, fall into that category. We see that the majority of companies, 70%, are kind of in the middle, where they have some elements of focusing on excellence, but they're not having a complete picture. And then finally, we see the 20%, the smaller final group, that really aren't doing enough. So their scores are in the 60s. And so this is based on actual data that we have in the index for 2017. So again, why is this the case? Just think about it a little bit. All of us are plagued with technology doubling, computing power doubling every 2 years. So what's happening is not only is technology changing, consumer behavior and their expectations of us are changing as fast. So the way all of us as consumers interact with companies today is very different than the way we interacted with companies 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. So that's one thing that we have to deal with as executives. We also have to deal with pressures, economic and political pressures on the market. We have competitors innovating and innovating again and again. And then finally, we have to deal with regulation. So executives today have a challenge, and their challenge is maintaining course. So I want you to remember with me the scene from the Titanic. I'm sure most of you have seen the film. And in the Titanic, there's a scene where everyone, the first day that the ship is pushing off, it's at the dinner table, the architect of the ship, the captain and the owner are sitting, and they're chatting with the VIP guests at the dinner table, and they're saying, this ship is a record breaker. It's a record breaker for being the most luxurious ship that was ever built. It's the fastest ship that was ever built, the largest, and it was also the safest ship that was ever built. And in the meantime, in the background, we have the crew of the ship working really, really hard to do one thing. What was that thing? Go fast, break that record, reach New York, the coast of New York City at the fastest speed as they could. And while they were looking for the dangers in the water, they weren't looking for them as carefully as they should have, because that wasn't the instruction that they were given. And so when they finally saw the iceberg, the unsinkable ship sank. And so what we'd like to do is say, we are here to help you navigate those murky waters. Those waters are fast and dark, and they're changing all the time, and you need to have a framework to help you do that. And that's why we introduced the Customer Satisfaction Index, which we are celebrating tonight. The results tonight are based on the Customer Satisfaction Index, which is your own customers evaluating you as companies on your service standards. And again, I'm really, really happy to see everyone here, because all of you are heroes in the eyes of your own consumers. But then we realized when we were dealing with companies that sometimes just showing them the numbers from an index alone was not a way to help them solve what had to happen. And so we've introduced last year, at first quietly, but now we're announcing it more formally, the Culture of Excellence Index. And this is a second index, and it is an index based on your own internal team, your staff as company executives, evaluating you on whether you're doing a good job, focusing on service excellence. And so the two are very complementary. One is the outside, the customer, making that judgment, and the other one is inside, the internal employee of a company, telling you, you're not helping us. And so the two of them are the formula, the equation for an excellent service level. So I'd like to spend a few minutes, you're more familiar with the CSI, but allow me to spend a few minutes talking about culture, because without culture, we can't do the outside. The Customer Satisfaction Index will not produce high scores unless you're doing something with your culture internally. And so with the Culture of Excellence Index that we've designed, we feel it's a diagnostic tool, so you see your scores, because it's also an index, it's a survey, so you see scores on certain elements, and we can also prescribe to you solutions on what you should be doing based on these scores. And it follows a method, and this method is a scientific method. So that brings us to this beautiful quote by Aristotle, who says, excellence is not an act, but a habit. Now, Aristotle is the father of the scientific method. So he's all about, making things persistently the same, ensuring that there's sustainability. And so taking from that, what we've tried to do is bring the science to satisfaction. Because satisfaction for many executives, and often by a lot of CEOs, it's the soft stuff, and they kind of dismiss it. And it is a challenge to have an executive who's usually programmed to look at the hard side, the numbers, to think of the soft side. That is a real challenge. So we've introduced a framework that allows us to do this. And we've simplified the framework, and we think that there's three pillars to a culture of excellence. And these three pillars are, the first one is leadership. So having a leadership team that is very focused and inspiring, and I'll talk about these briefly. The second is winning the hearts, so engaging with our team. And the third of these is a rational one, if you want, the hard side, the executive side that they're usually programmed to understand. So very briefly, let me talk about the first one. So leadership. Leadership is about the ability to tell people, this is where I want you to go, this is the direction I want you to go to, and you're assigning responsibilities to people. And then you're asking people, you're inspiring them, and then you're backing them up. And I love this quote by this Chinese philosopher, where he says, to lead people, you need to walk behind them, which means to walk behind somebody, they already know where they're going. They already know what they have to achieve. And your job as a leader is to support them constantly, day in and day out. So that's the first one. So leadership is, if you want, the key that's going to open the door to culture. So once we've opened the door, what's the first thing that we see that companies need to do? The first thing is winning the heart. So the emotional side. Winning the heart has an impact of around 40%. 40% is a very significant correlation. In other words, if your team is not engaged, happy, focused on what it needs to achieve, it's not going to happen. And the only way that you can do that is by leadership supporting that. And again, this quote by Simon Sinek, that for people to contribute, they have to be emotionally invested in an organization as opposed to financially invested. So winning the heart has three elements as well. So we're peeling the onion, if you want. And these levels are engaging with the team. So the first one is engaging, the second one is people, and the third is reward. So I just want to share a brief story on engaging. Engaging with the team means you tell your team again and again and again what you expect of them. This is one of the key drivers for excellence, is the team knowing what they need to do. And I had the honor of meeting a CEO recently who runs a huge retail operation that's multinational. And he was new to the job. And he said the first day that he came to the job, the very first day, what he did is he threw a party. So he threw a party for his employees, and he said, I need you to do three things. And these three things are, you smile, you say please, and you say thank you. As simple as that. Of course, there's a lot more to the program that he threw. It wasn't just these three things. It sounds like Barney. It's not just Barney. There's more to it. There's selfies and parties and pictures. But the idea was to get the team, he gave them the message in a fun way, so he engaged with them. So that's what engaging is: defining, focusing, repeating again and again. The second one is people. So getting people who have the attitude that they want to serve, so the right attitude, educating them, so training them day in and day out, and then also getting them to work as a team. There's a parking attendant in a building that I deal with often, and there's usually a queue leaving this building, and I'm always in my car watching this guy engage with people a few windows down. And I always see him smiling, and his head is always bubbly, and he's cheerful. And when I pull up to his window, he's always very, very polite, courteous, and so cheerful, despite sitting in this tiny room and all he deals with day in and day out is money. But he's able to transcend the most mundane of tasks, which is taking money from people and giving money back, in a way that I always drive away with a tiny smile in my heart, because that's what service, the kind of attitude that you need to recruit in your teams. The last one in the engaging the heart is reward. And reward isn't about money. Let me be very clear about that. It's not about throwing money out there. It's about praise. It's about recognizing people day in and day out and telling them you're doing a good job. And it's harder than we think it is, because again, we're not programmed to tell people what a good job they're doing. It's in our nature. It's a self-defense mechanism not to do it. So we need to make sure that we do that. So we've talked about leadership, opening the door. We've talked about winning the hearts. The final component of the pillars, the 3 pillars that we talked about, is convincing the mind. Convincing the mind is where most CEOs get what they have to do. This is about the processes. This is about the fix-its. This is about, the various things that they have to do to improve on their products day in and day out. And the challenge is to build a process and a system that's constantly innovating, because as Steve Jobs says, by the time you build something, people want something else, so they don't know what they want. So you have to embed into your processes constant innovation at the cultural level. Again, this pillar has 3 elements into it. The first of them is resources, processes, and measure. So resources means that there's a team in place in your organization whose responsibility is to make sure, company-wide, that everyone is clear on their job and they're achieving, they're doing their job. So it's a team that's very strategic and very empowered. The second one is processes, and this one most companies get. So what is the procedure for answering phones? How do you answer somebody that's angry? What's your procedure when something goes wrong, etc.? So it's documenting all these procedures. But it's also setting standards. What is our speed standard? What is our standard for accuracy? So looking at these numbers, that also comes easily. The one that's a challenge is innovation. So how do you build a process of innovation in your organization so you're able to innovate day in and day out, not just every once in a while when somebody has a bright idea? The challenge here is to encourage innovation from everyone in the company. And then the final element that I'd like to speak about is measure. So do you have the KPIs in your organization that allows you to look at your scores regularly? So they're not old numbers, they're fresh numbers. A lot of companies that we work with, we see that they're looking at numbers that are too old. So you need to build in a dashboard that allows you to collect this number on a periodic basis and be able to respond and align to it. Because we're looking at the numbers side, I'd like to now share with you the Customer Satisfaction Index results that we have from Service Hero. We'll start with a brief video that we'll play, and then I'll shed a bit more insight on some of the numbers that we've seen. to speak a little bit about some of the numbers that we collected this year. We collected and validated 43,000 records, but in reality, we collected well over 50,000 assessments. Imagine this, over 50,000 people took the time to rate brands in Kuwait and the UAE because they cared to, because they knew that their voice is going to be heard. And what we do to these records is we authenticate them. So we have 3 flags, very, very easy. You keep a record, you investigate it, or you immediately delete it. And as a result, our final data set is 19,300 for Kuwait, and for the UAE, over 24,000 assessments. So I just want to say that it takes a lot of time to do this because we want to make sure we're reporting on the right, correct data. What have we seen? Now, we're partners with the American Customer Satisfaction Index, and the American Customer Satisfaction Index methodology is the same methodology that we're using. And because of that, we're able to do comparisons of Kuwait versus the UAE versus the US versus, there's 15 other countries in the world that are using the ACSI methodology. So the first thing that we note here is the UAE index outperforms all other indices, 77.9. In fact, the UAE index increased 2% since last year. That's a healthy growth rate. Kuwait grew by 1.5% or less than 1.5%. Now, our theory on the UAE is the following. We have the federal government in the UAE saying 2 things all the time. Excellence is one of them, and the other one is happiness. So making people happy. And now companies are even forced to have chief happiness officers, which sounds a little bit, maybe a little bit for us, a bit strange, but it's true. So if you're saying, I want to make people happy, I want to offer excellent service, it's going down. It's going from the government level down to the private sector. So that's the reason we see an outperforming market in the UAE. Kuwait has always been very close to the US index score, so this is a healthy pattern as well. It's a market that competition is healthy in it, and we see performance doing well. And then you find the lowest scoring one is Singapore. Not that they're bad service providers, but they're more difficult to please. They don't give 9s and 10s as easily as this part of the world does. So that's the first comment in terms of comparing numbers across countries. I'd like to just spend a moment just looking at the service dimensions. We measure 8 service dimensions. We measure them before and after. In this graph here, we're showing the scores for the after, so actual satisfaction scores. You'll see in both markets, the lowest 2 scores are value for money and website, so those are the bottom. At the top, you'll see they change slightly. So we have locations scoring 79.7, that's just under an 8. So companies in the UAE are investing a lot in their locations. Okay, so that's the takeaway on that. And then followed by reliability. In Kuwait, the highest score is staff attitude and then reliability. We do something else with these numbers. You might want to say to yourself as a company, as an executive, where should I focus my energy? Should I tackle website and value for money because they're the lowest scoring? Well, based on our correlation analysis, where we put the numbers into a statistical model, we're able to compute which of the 8 dimensions here is the most impactful. And based on our model, we see 2 that have the strongest push towards overall satisfaction. These 2, which are reliability, 31%, and product quality or service quality, 24%, are the ones that will shape overall satisfaction. Maintain high scores in these 2, and your overall satisfaction scores will be very healthy. On the opposite side of that, look at location. It has a -1% score. In fact, location doesn't even fit into the picture. Location is really important for sales. Probably you need location, sales for coffee shops in different places, banks, etc. But it's not going to make somebody loyal. What's going to make somebody loyal is consistently offering service at the same level and doing it with accuracy, so which is reliability, and you can define it whichever way you want. And also the product that you sell, if it's a supermarket, the service that you offer in a bank is the other one that you need to focus on. So that's just looking at drivers of satisfaction. In terms of looking at loyalty, we look at it 2 ways, as a score as well as an NPS. An NPS means the likelihood of somebody to be a promoter of my brand, and we've consistently seen that people with the lowest likelihood to be brand ambassadors are people with high education. We see different other patterns, but consistently we always see if you have a master's or PhD, it's really hard to make you an ambassador of a brand because your intolerance to mistakes is really high. And conversely, people who are easily served, easily loyal, they tend to be lower educated. Also, they tend to be over 60, possibly because they're served better because of the white hairs on their heads. That's the theory that we have. I'd like to conclude the numbers looking at categories. So in the UAE, of the 14 categories that we're measuring, 2 score over 80 points. Those are really healthy, 6, excuse me, not 2. The 6 are above 80 points. That's a very healthy index for the UAE. You see new car sales, electronics, and cafes. Those are industries that are not typically at the top of the index. Typically, we see cafes and casual dining leading everyone else because they're leisure industries. And we see one category that's in the 60s, which is the same category that's at the bottom of the Kuwait Index. Taking a look at the Kuwait Index, here we have 2 above 80. And these 2 above 80 you'll see are cafes, and another strange one, Islamic banks. So a very healthy category. Islamic banks are doing much better than the UAE and doing a phenomenal job in Kuwait. And then at the very bottom, we have mobile operators and ISPs in the 60s. And so I just want to remind everyone that the numbers are there. We have our reports immediately available for any company that's interested in learning from the independent benchmark that we offer, what different demographic groups think of you. So we're measuring 4 demographic groups, what dimensions you have, how you compare to your peers, what's your trend over time. So those, talk to anyone of the team after this presentation about that. I want to remind you again about looking at the framework for excellence. Again, this is the internal side of it, not the external. Internally, make sure that you do the 3 things. Lead your team, set the direction first, and then lead. And stay consistent on that, because it's very easy to deviate. The cracks will happen. Move away from the cracks. Stay focused. The second one is winning hearts, which is, again, engaging, praising. Just do the simple things. It's not that hard. And then finally, it's making sure that you have the processes to back you up. So the framework, which is the internal side, helps us. I have a little announcement. This year, we decided to acknowledge our consumers. We have, I can't remember the number now, in the tens of thousands of consumers in our database. And these are people that some of them have left such rich comments, and some of their comments are being viewed by others, and some of them are being shared by others, and some are being agreed to and disagreed to. So we decided to introduce badges to our consumers. So we have 3 types of badges. We have obviously member since. We have a service expert. So this is the quality of the person that's doing the assessment. We have somebody who's an ambassador, who is a type of person that talks about the assessment at Service Hero. And finally, we have somebody called an influencer, who is leaving the types of comments that is influencing people's minds about brands. So they're shaping people's minds. So we're really happy that we started this. It's just been introduced this past month. And with time, we know that that's going to grow. Okay, we have a little accident outside. I just remind you that we have a lot of engagement happening on our website. More and more people are coming to servicehero.com to see brand reviews and interact with them. We have over 12,000 user comments last year alone. We have 17,000 consumers interacting. That means that they've done something with a comment. They've behaved a certain way, like, dislike. And then we have people visiting brand info pages, which means they're taking the time to look at other people's remarks on a brand info page, any brand that you can think of on servicehero.com. And I'd like to finally, again, remind everyone that our reports are available. But more importantly, we're always thinking ourselves, how can we innovate? How can we make sure innovation is part of our process at Service Hero? So we're working very hard on automating the reports so companies can log in online and see their scores. And also, if they wanted to see it more frequently, obviously, but also some customized questions added to the index. We're available for that. I'd love for anyone to talk to our CTO, our Chief Technology Officer, Adib, who's sitting at this table, if you have any ideas that you'd like to share on online reporting. And that brings me to, again, reminding everyone that excellence is about culture first, and then the external will follow. So with that, I'm really happy and really excited about our panel that we're going to have right now, and I'm going to ask Katie to come back to introduce our panel members. Thank you.
Thank you, Faten.